The Florida Panthers have made quite a few more signings ahead of the 2022-2023 season. We're going to also discuss what the power play could possibly look like, and also what how did teams that Paul Maurice took over, how did they look this season prior to what they did in his first year? We're going to discuss that all and more on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Tuesday, July 19th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from PantherParkway.com. You can follow me on Twitter at MonoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers. And thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. Don't forget to also subscribe to Locked On NHL and the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast with Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden. We'll be covering all the off-season activities around the National Hockey League. So, Panther fans, there have been quite a few more signings, like I said at the top, for the Panthers ahead of this 2022-23 season, and more of the signings of depth players for the Panthers. It's crazy because it feels as if the Florida Panthers, as far as this free agency period, has become Ottawa Senators South in this situation. We spoke about Colin White coming to the Cats, and now we have two more former Senators, coming into the mix for the Florida Panthers. 28-year-old center Chris Tierney signed a 1-year, 2-way deal with the Panthers, likely to be as part of AHL Depth for the Panthers, as well as defenseman Michael Delzato, 32-year-old defenseman, another 1-year, 2-way deal. And really, Delzato and Tierney were really guys who were buried, really in lesser roles for the Ottawa Senators during their time there. And as far as their time to come with the Panthers, it's likely going to be once again some AHL time for the team. And, it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world because, the Panthers still have some young guys who are still trying to be prepared to get their call-ups and to make an impact on this team. We've spoken many times about Grigory Denisenko. Logan Hutsko has one more year on his ELC before he becomes an RFN, still yet to make his NHL debut. And Cole Schwitt, Justin Sordoff, who's going to be in Charlotte for his first year starting next year. And, there's a good opportunity. And for Delzato, he gets to mentor people like a Matt Kierstead, who signed a 2-year deal just earlier this offseason. This year is a 2-way deal. Next year is 1-way only. And it's good for multiple players who are over the age of 30 to be part of this team as part of guys who have been on NHL rosters who can mentor young guys, because another one who's still on the team is captain Zach Dalpe as well, who helped the Charlotte Checkers go far into the Calder Cup playoffs, eventually losing to the former affiliate of the Panthers in the Springfield Thunderbirds. So a good opportunity for them. And like we mentioned earlier last week, Anthony Boteto, defenseman, 32-year-old. So more of those older guys in the mix for the Panthers, who's going to help them, who's going to hopefully help them reach that next level when they do eventually come to the NHL. And another signing, a forward, Jerry Mayhew, a 29-year-old, 1-year, 2-way deal for the Cats. Spent most of the last season in the Philadelphia Flyers organization and Anaheim Ducks. Spent most of his time in the AHL with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms, 16 points in 24 games there. Only 25 games at the NHL level for Philly before eventually going to Anaheim. Previously, he was with the Minnesota Wild organization, bounced up and down their NHL and AHL affiliate in the Iowa Wild as well. So more depth signings for the Panthers. And listen, this is a year where the Panthers are coming off 2 straight seasons of sharing a farm system with another team. 2 years ago, sharing with the Tampa Bay Lightning in Syracuse, and then last year sharing with the Seattle Kraken in Charlotte. So now they got this affiliate all to themselves, and they have quite a few spots open. So they're using some of their open spots to fill some with those older veteran hockey players to help the young guys eventually help them get into the next level. And we had an ELC signing this weekend. 2021 second round pick Evan Naus, defenseman from the Quebec Men's Junior Hockey League. He signed a two-year ELC, I believe, 3-year ELC, excuse me. 19 years old, former second round pick, and he averaged almost a point per game as well in his last 2 seasons for the Quebec Remparts. Great puck moving defenseman as his prospect profile shows. So an exciting time, and a guy who probably impressed a lot in the development camp just recently in South Florida, and definitely a guy that was really that the Panthers really covet as far as their most recent picks. I mean, Mackey was someone who was very impressive in the development camp from the reporters who were there. They spoke a lot about NHL ready players. Mackey was one that was mentioned quite a lot, and Evan Naus was also another one as well, along with Max Gutsta. He still has a few more years before he reaches to the NHL level, but hey, an undrafted guy signed from the OHL in the Panthers organization. There's a lot of excitement when it comes to the guys who were just in South Florida most recently. And they mentioned it on Territory Talk just the other day about how it's been a while since we've had an in-person development camp here in South Florida, and of course COVID is still very well out there. And though we are at a point now where we can interact again and be in person again for events, this was a great opportunity for everyone to be together, and even their own draft classes, the last 3 of them, to be together as well. So they get to meet each other and get to hang out. And of course, some of the off ice activities that they've done is like paddle boating, boys and girls club, you name it. So it's the camaraderie that they have there. It's just great to see for all of them who made it down there. In segment number 2, we are going to discuss what the power play could possibly look like for the Panthers. We're going to discuss that more in the next segment here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about Built Bar. And from the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You probably tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar, but guess what? Your friends over at Built have given coconut brownie chunk the Puffs treatment. That's right, the coconut brownie chunk Built Bar flavor you love in a deliciously chewy marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. But stop drooling and listen. They're good for you. Low calorie, low sugar, high protein, and all delicious. Coconut brownie chunk puffs are only here for a limited time, so go to built.com to make sure you don't miss out. They are going fast because they taste amazing. All Built Bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides a ton of health benefits. Eat something that tastes good and is good for you. The best part about Built Puffs is, of course, the taste. They taste amazing, but you can enjoy them guilt-free because they're actually good for you. They are the perfect treat, perfect when you got a craving, you need to satisfy your sweet tooth, or you need a quick, healthy snack. They're an excellent source of protein. Delicious coconut, rich, sweet brownie, creamy marshmallow. Stop fantasizing and get to Built.com to order your box of coconut brownie chunk Built Puffs right now. Go to Built.com, use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your order. Use promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at Built.com. Which NFL stars moved the betting line the most? Starting July 18th, Locked On gives you the 50 most valuable players in the NFL from the odds makers at BetOnline. Available July 18th on Locked On NFL, wherever you get your podcasts, and on YouTube. Back here on this second segment here on Locked On Panthers. So, I've had a lot to think about when it comes to what this power play could possibly look like. And really, at this point, I'm pretty much throwing some guesses out there as far as what it could be, because at points last season, the Panthers had a 5-4 power play, then went back to having 1D with Aaron Ekblad coming back into the mix. And then, of course, this offseason with losing Claude Giroux to the Ottawa Senators. And then, of course, Anthony Duclair. He won't be on that right side taking one-timers on the power play, at least for the first half of the season. Now, there's at least a spot to put on that power play unit for the Panthers. And I have a few candidates that I wrote down as that last spot for the Cats. First, let's get out of the way the guys who are going to likely be there for sure. Aaron Ekblad, Jonathan Huberdeau, Alexander Barkov, and Sam Reinhart, likely the guy who's going to be right in front of the net. Career high in power play goals last season. And here are some of the candidates that I have for the Panthers power play 1. Sam Bennett, Carter Verhaeghe, Anton Lundell, and possibly Nick Cousins. Nick Cousins played mostly power play 2 during his time with the Nashville Predators the last 2 seasons. So I'm going to eliminate Nick Cousins as far as power play 1. With Claude Giroux and Anthony Duclair out of the mix, Carter Verhaeghe is more, as far as situationally, has been placed more at even strength roles for the Panthers. I do think he should have some power play time. However, I do think that the lack of time on the power play, he's going to be on power play 2, not on the first unit, at least to start the season. Anton Lundell, we see him on the defensive side for penalty kills. But I also think he's going to be part of power play 2 as well. But of course, he's still 20 years old, so it's going to take a little bit of time to get comfortable in that position. But of course, I believe Anton Lundell will eventually be part of the power play 1, just like how I believe that eventually Anton Lundell is going to be on the second line center. I mean, Nick Fairbanks and I have been raving so much about this guy over the last year and a half. Just go back to even when the Florida Panthers were eliminated by Tampa Bay the first go round in 2021. We were raving about him. So that leaves Sam Bennett. As far as the time on ice for power with the man advantage, he it looks like that him by default is going to be the next guy to step up for the Panthers on power play 1. As far as time on ice from last season, he was right behind the Giroux and the Duclairs of the world. He was mostly on power play 2. And this is really, we're really starting to see, once again, the impact of Duke's injury right here. And really how it affects different parts of the lineup with the regular forward lines like we discussed last week. And now we go to the power play here. But let's also talk about the roles that we expect these players to play here. Of course, Aaron Ekblad and Barkov are likely going to be switching back and forth of who's quarterbacking the power play. At least that's what we saw majority of last season. And, it fell apart throughout the playoffs, but I don't expect another 1 for 31 even to start the season. So, but it could be a little bit of growing pains to start the season because you're going to have Ekblad at the point, and then you're going to have Barkov at the point, and then Ekblad shifting over to the left, Jonathan Huberdeau likely going towards the middle. They could do a 1-3-1 and then shift to a 1-2-2 as far as the power play. And chances are the 1-2-2, if I had to guess, is when Barkov takes the point. And Ekblad's going to shift to the left. Jonathan Huberdeau goes a little bit to his right, and then Bennett and Rhino will be down the middle. But Rhino is likely going to be there right in front of the net, screening, making screens throughout the whole, no matter what formation the Panthers go. And also depends what side of the faceoff is going to be taken. Barkov is likely going to take it on the left side, and Bennett would likely take it on the right side. So you have two guys who could take faceoffs on the power play as well. So that's and it's going to be hard replacing Giroux as far as the faceoff percentage, because Giroux, like 60% faceoffs almost last season. That's going to be something that's missed. As far as I know, faceoffs aren't the end all be all, but when you lose a faceoff and it's clear out of the zone, that's like at least a good 10-15 seconds taken off the clock. Let's not forget that. So Panthers got to find a way to win some of those draws on the man advantage as well. So they got more of that zone time. They can move around. They could rearrange. Jonathan Huberdeau can take an opportunity to go behind the net and then find a play, because we all know how much of a playmaker Jonathan Huberdeau is. What I'm hoping, though, under this new coaching staff is less of the pass, and then shoot, and then there's a blocking lane. I hope there's more of trying to create a deflection off Sam Reinhart, which, hey, that's what resulted in the Panthers being 5th in the NHL in a power play percentage last season, especially when they had that 5 forward unit. And then in the playoffs, we saw too much of the hesitancy with this team. And that's maybe what Bill Zito's line of thinking was when it came to hiring Paul Maurice in the first place. That taking more of that initiative to say, hey, even if it doesn't look like the best shot, try to see if you can bounce it off someone and into the net. Put the puck into the net. Sometimes good things happen when those definitely happen. So as of now, the power play 1 unit that I would have would be Ekblad, Huberdeau, Bennett, Barkov, and Rhino. Sometimes you might see one-timers from Barkov from the right side. Sometimes with Ekblad quarterbacking it, sometimes you might see Barkov shifting up and then Ekblad taking those one-timers. And ask Jacob Winans, he was raving for Ekblad to take those one-timers from the left side. You've heard that many times on this show. As far as power play too, this one I had a little bit of a harder time writing down. I think for now, it's going to be somewhere along the lines of Montour, Verhaeghe. I think Verhaeghe will get his chance for some power play time next year. Nick Cousins, who we spoke earlier in this segment about how he had some power play time in Nashville for power play 2. Patrick Hornquist, the veteran, he's going to be that net presence in front as he has been since he's been in a Florida Panthers uniform. And Anton Lundell, you got to have someone who's going to win you some draws in the offensive zone as well. So that's what's going to help with keeping some zone time and putting pucks into the net, even though power play 1 takes up 3/4 of the power play time at most times on the man advantage. So those are the players that I have for now as the power play units for the Panthers. Tomorrow we're going to discuss where our ideal penalty kill units for the Panthers will look like. But today, this is the power play segment of the show. In the third and final segment, we're going to discuss what Paul Maurice's teams looked like the year before and what they did in his first season once Paul Maurice was hired. Since we're looking this season as Paul Maurice's first year with the Panthers, we're going to discuss that more in the next segment here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast on this Tuesday, July 19th edition of the show. And some programming notes, actually, I didn't say this at the top, is starting next week, we are going to be bringing Locked On Panthers only 3 times a week, with it being the offseason and most of free agency and the draft behind us. We will be having less shows, but of course, we will still be here covering the Panthers. So starting next week, we'll be going to 3 times a week. Don't know necessarily what the recording schedule will necessarily look like. We'll still have our Wine-Ins Wednesdays. We'll still have our Fairbanks Fridays. As far as the other day of when the show will record, who knows? It could be a Saturday. It could be a Monday. It could be a Tuesday. It could be a Thursday. Who knows? But we'll still have our ideal theme days for Wednesdays and Fridays. But going back to Paul Maurice and what he's done in his first year in his recent stops. We spoke about the success. We spoke about or lack thereof, excuse me. We've spoken about the playoff appearances, and it's crazy. I think this is the first time I've said this on this show, but there have been some really lazy takes about Paul Maurice. And the laziest take I've heard of him was most regulation losses for a coach in NHL history. Why is that lazy? You don't get to that many regulation losses if you're allowed to coach that long. So the logic behind that, in my opinion, is very flawed. I will say. It's like Kobe Bryant in the NBA. He's had the most missed shots in NBA history. Are people calling him a scrub? No. And he doesn't have that many more regulation losses than Barry Trotz. And this fan base was raving about Barry Trotz for weeks before Paul Maurice was hired. And he didn't make a conference final until he won the Cup with Washington. And Paul Maurice has made a conference final. A Stanley Cup final in 2002. Got swept by one of the best teams of all time in the 2002 Detroit Red Wings. So, before you say most regulation losses in NHL history, please, for the love of God, realize what you're saying and realize the logic behind what you're saying, because it is a lazy take. And I will say that publicly. And all right, so Paul Maurice's first year with Hartford/Carolina replaces Paul Holmgren mid-season. Finished with 77 points. Next season, they're about the same. Still not a playoff team. And of course, there's only so much a coach can do when it comes to like the team that's put around them. So still took a little bit for him to like put his stamp on that team. And of course, in that first tenure, he makes the Stanley Cup final, like we said earlier. So around the same in his first season. We're just talking about first seasons. In Toronto, replaces Pat Quinn just 2 years after the 04-05 lockout. And before, the Toronto Maple Leafs had 90 points. This was the only time other than this year that Paul Maurice is entering a situation where there's an off season outside of Toronto. The other two times he replaced somebody mid-season. So in Toronto, he replaces them in the off season. 90 points the first season. About the same the very next season in Toronto. Doesn't have much success there. Very short stint. Second stint with the Carolina Hurricanes. Of course, this was replaced Peter Laviolette. It's funny, Peter Laviolette replaced him, and then Paul Maurice replaces Peter Laviolette again. It's like Grover Cleveland, former U.S. president, but the hockey version of it. For my Canadian listeners, if you don't know much about American history, Grover Cleveland was the 22nd president of the U.S. Was the president from 1985 to 89. Loses to Benjamin Harrison in the election in 1888, excuse me, and then resumes the presidency in 1893 to 99. So 2 stints of presidency for Grover Cleveland, and then 2 stints as a head coach for Paul Maurice. The Carolina Hurricanes, after he replaced Laviolette midseason, had 97 points. Then they went downward after that. 80 points the next. So that was really the only season where there was a big decline in his team's play. Winnipeg. He replaces Claude Noel mid-season. So once again, the only time that he's come into a situation in the offseason was in Toronto, outside of Florida. 84 points that the Winnipeg Jets finished in his first season. In the season that he replaced Claude Noel. Very next season, 99. So a 15-point jump in that first season. Are we expecting a jump for this Panthers team with Paul Maurice? I don't think so. It's hard to repeat 122 points. So this is a different type of situation, is what I'm saying. But do we expect a huge dip from this team? The over-under for next season has the Panthers right now at 101. 101 is still a playoff team. And at this point, really, for the Panthers, I don't care about the regular season. I don't care. We're at that point where the Panthers have never seen 4 years in a row of being in the postseason, if you want to count the bubble in 2020. This would technically be their 4th season in a row making the playoffs. At this point, it's about getting there and going from there. And if you get 101 points, as what the over-under is saying right now for the Panthers, then I don't care about the decline in points for the team. And let's put some context with the role players that they lost as well. And right now, it's about getting to the trade deadline, putting your team in a position of what you could do once the trade deadline hits. And of course, these minor moves for the Panthers doesn't mortgage their future anymore. I would still do part of the trade deadline last season over again. And there was a question on Twitter, is if the Claude Giroux signing was a failure. I only say yes because you didn't win the cup. But do you make that move again? Hell yes. You definitely make that move again. When you can have a player of Claude Giroux's caliber, yes. Absolutely. But again, really the big loss from opening night last year to this year was March Mint. And with March Mint missing a lot of games, the Panthers were still able to keep afloat too. So it's not like this team is with a whole bunch of scrubs on them. This is a President's Trophy winning team that is just coming into this season. They're hopefully gonna get healthier with Duke. Of course, the season has to play out, and we got to reevaluate this team week by week, month by month, of course. And our confidence level of when they go to the playoffs versus where they are at the trade deadline versus 2 weeks. We're gonna go through the roller coaster, that's for sure. But like there's a saying is the only time you die of a roller coaster if you get off. Let's not die off that roller coaster. Let's stay strapped in and let's enjoy the ride. Because the Panthers, they still have the players from last year. And once again, we hope that we don't see a whole bunch of these 3-goal comebacks. More of those complete 60-minute games. Sure, it's not always fun to be behind by a goal within a minute left of the game. But long term, if we're talking about long term, I rather be in these late 1-goal games that is within a goal throughout the entirety of the game versus chasing consistently and consistently and consistently. That's where I'd rather be, even if it results in a loss for these Panthers. Because with falling behind many times, you're creating bad habits. That's not what the Panthers want to create. Falling behind within a goal and having that consistently throughout the game, even 2, let's say, you come out on the losing end in the regular season, the mindset in the locker room could possibly be that they are getting there and that they're growing and that they're progressing. I mean, yeah, we saw a 3-goal comeback once in the playoffs against Washington, but it's just not a sustainable product. And silly me and silly all of us Panther fans for thinking at the time, I was like, oh yeah, they can come back from all these leads because they're the Panthers, they're the fastest team there, or at least one of the fastest teams and one of the most skilled teams. One of the fastest and one of the skilled teams. That's a fact. Yes, we do agree with that. But as far as sometimes coming out of the gate, that's what the Panthers are looking for in coming into this season. It's not a coincidence that their goal differential in the second and third period last year was way better than the first. So what we are hoping for is better starts and keeping it within reach throughout the whole 60 minutes. And hey, if you come out to a big lead, even then, hey, nobody in this fan base is going to complain about that. Definitely. I know I won't. But it's just about not consistently falling behind and chasing the game. Because, yeah, those comebacks are fun. They create for highlight reels. They create for stories like on this podcast. It creates something to talk about. But the anxiety that comes with it, I don't want that next season. I definitely don't want that roller coaster. I definitely won't jump off, but you definitely don't want to consistently have that next season. Thank you once again for tuning into this episode of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Tomorrow's edition of Locked On Panthers, we'll be bringing in Jake Winans of PantherBarkway.com. We'll be discussing the penalty kill for the Panthers, and we are going to start one of our off-season what if segments on Locked On Panthers, on the Florida Panthers. What if they did blank in this past? how would it have set up the Panthers currently in the future? So we're going to be starting that part of the show in where we are currently in the dog days of summer. We're going to discuss that more later on this week. But in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Still Roden. We'll be covering all the offseason activities around the National Hockey League. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And for your second listen of the day, make sure to listen to today's episode of Locked On NHL. Locked On NHL has you covered every Monday through Friday. It's a daily 30-minute podcast where it covers the NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute podcast. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.